Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to our spring semester coffee hour lecture series, and I hope you all had a good start of the semester. So I'm Shujie Wang, and it's my great pleasure to host our first seminar with Dr. Michael Widener, and he's gonna present some of his very exciting work of food environment and transportation research. For this talk, we gonna handle the questions in the end after Michael's talk. If you have any questions, you can either post in the chat or Q&A, or you can also raise hands. So after the talk, we're gonna handle the questions together. And before I formally introduce Michael, let me first announce some news about our department. Okay, the first is Alan McEachran has announced his retirement at the end of June 2020. Many thanks to Alan for his great contribution to our department over the past 36 years. Erica Smishwick has been awarded the title of Distinguished Professor. Congratulations, Erica. Joshua Inwood was quoted in the article, "Don't move all just yet. Could a Truth or Reconciliation Commission help the country heal?" In the Atlantic. Laurie Dollar has been appointed as the department's first associate head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And Brantley Hinger, Gillian Prater-Lee, and Jacqueline Weir have been elected as new graduate representatives within the Department of Geography. Ruchi Patel and Connor Chapman are the new EMS Graduate Council representatives for the Department of Geography. The first year undergraduate student Riley Adams was awarded placement in the NASA Pennsylvania Space Grant Research Internship Program with Alexander Klippo as her mentor. Alumna Emily Klipp, who earned post-baccalaureate certificate in GIS in 2010, was promoted to associate, and alumnus Sid Panday, who earned his bachelor's degree in geography in 2014, was promoted to senior associate at Dewberry. And after those news, we also acknowledge the 2020 to 2021 Speakers Committee: Carl Zimmer, Luke Trousseau, Shujie Wang, Jeremy Diaz, Carol Sackman, and Angela Rogers. So also because this seminar series is also part of our course 590. So for students who registered for 590, you are also required to ask questions and post reflection in Canvas afterwards. So now let me introduce our today's speaker. Michael Widener is an associate professor and Canada Research Chair in Transportation and Health in the Department of Geography and Planning, and the incoming Director of Health Studies at the University of Toronto, Canada. Michael received his PhD in Geography at the University of Buffalo, State University of New York. And he is primarily interested in topics related to health, transportation, and urban geography and planning. His current research projects explore the impact of the built environment of food access and dietary behaviors, how older adults' mental health and well-being is affected by their mobility options, and the links between time use and health outcomes. So his talk today is titled "The Food Activities, Socioeconomics, Time Use, and Transportation Study, a New Approach to Food Environment Research and Preliminary Findings." Okay, without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Michael Widener.
All right, thank you, Shujie. It's really a pleasure to be with you all virtually, and it's great to see you again. In particular, Shujie was a grad student at the University of Cincinnati when I was there at my first academic job, and so I'm very happy to see that she's ended up at your department. She's great. So it's really a pleasure to come and give this talk to you all today. I guess with that, I'll just get started. I'll apologize beforehand. I've got two cats roaming around, and so if I have to pause for a second to push them out of the way, I apologize. One is on my lap. If I try to remove him, it'll just end up causing more trouble. So Vonnegut will be co-presenting with me today. So let me share my screen. And oops. All right. Are you able to see my screen okay? Yeah, okay. I'll skip my own introduction. I think I was very adequately introduced just now, but I want to quickly highlight Lindsay Smith, who's a postdoc who just joined me at the University of Toronto from the CEDAR group at the University of Cambridge, and Bochu Liu, who is one of my PhD students who have both helped me with the work on this project. So I'll jump right into the talk here. If I can change slides, there it is. So geographers have been involved in research related to food environments for quite some time now. And this sort of corresponds with a more general interest in how our built environments have impacted health. And the research on it by geographers that has sort of been produced over the last few decades. So this body of work really emerged alongside, I would argue, the growth of geographic information systems and the increasing availability of spatial data sets. And you know, the power and limits of GIS have, for better or worse, shaped a lot of how we as geographers think about what food environments are and how they impact other elements of behavior and outcomes like health. So a lot of the work in built environment and health research and food environments and health research in particular is focused on linking outcomes to spatial context. And so you'll see lots of papers out there that examine access or exposure to particular types of food retailers and outcomes like sort of objective health measures. So you know, A1C or self-reported health, for example, or food-related behaviors. So how many fast food meals did somebody eat in a week? Now, maybe not surprisingly, we've seen a lot of inconsistent results related to these, or when we sort of look at literature reviews that look at all these studies, we see a lot of inconsistent results. And the reasons for this inconsistency is maybe not all that surprising, given that we see a wide range of spatial scopes that are considered. There are oftentimes issues with statistical power, which I'll note I don't address in the work that I show with you today. Data collection inconsistencies, so what types of stores are classified or considered are often different, and issues in measurement. Now, if we think specifically a bit about food environments and how an individual connects with their food environment in this context, it also becomes clear that not only are there sort of methodological issues, but there are also sort of theoretical and conceptual issues that we want to think about more carefully, like the financial situation of an individual looking to buy food, their transportation opportunities, their personal tastes, knowledge about types of food, their time use, their social network and family context, as well as maybe facilities within their home if they have the sort of cooking facilities to actually make different types of food that may be more or less healthy. Now, that sort of complicates this idea, but I think it's worth taking a step back and thinking more generally about the basic model used in a lot of research on food environments that focus on access and exposure. Okay, he's on the move. I'm just going to put him there. So the basic model it looks a little bit like this, where we've got sort of access or exposure influences diet. So if you're near a healthy and affordable food retailer, then you're going to be more likely to eat healthy and affordable food. And if you eat healthy food, then you're going to be more likely to be healthy later on. So you're eating more fruits and vegetables, for example, it's going to influence your health in positive ways. But one of the big problems with this is, of course, that all along the line here, we've got sort of these complicating factors. So the first, maybe most related to geography, is that access is a little tricky to define. Do we consider only residential accessibility, so access around one's home? Do we think about activity spaces? And if we think about activity spaces, what is the activity space? You know, how much do we count certain spaces over other spaces? Down the line with diet, it's all sorts of things, some of which I mentioned in the previous couple of slides, are affected by all sorts of things. So whether or not you have time to prepare meals from scratch, whether or not you are in a financial situation to afford different types of food. And then there's the health outcomes that we're interested in. So, you know, we may consider something like cardiovascular disease, but it's not just diet that goes into impacting one's cardiovascular health. There's all sorts of other things, genetics and so on. So it's a very complicated picture, and it's a little tricky to go from maybe access to a supermarket to cardiovascular health in a way that is very convincing, without sort of addressing some of the things that are maybe in between. And so in thinking about all of this, I've been kind of contemplating how geographers can unpack that relationship in a way that maybe makes for more useful approaches to understanding food environments, and maybe expanding the concept to thinking a bit more generally about food geographies in a way that allows us to understand what mechanisms are actually driving people to maybe eat more healthfully or not. And one area I keep returning to is this idea that thinking about individual level interactions with the built-in food environments, thinking about them as dynamic, is going to allow us to start to do this. Because if we start to think about that sort of sequence of events that results in a person making a decision, we can look at the before and after activities and context, and maybe understand a bit more about the role of place, but also the role of time and how one's outcomes come to be. So the basic idea here is that a person's geography and time use are inextricably linked. And for food-related activities in particular, there are certain temporal patterns and scales that are going to matter. So how can we kind of disentangle the impacts of space and time from diet and health? Now, over the last decade or so, we've seen quite a bit of advancement in the ability to collect data that is dynamic. So spatiotemporal information is easier to collect thanks to the ubiquity of GPS devices. And there's all sorts of new data streams that we're able to collect. But I want to understand and think about what this will mean for research on food environments and food geographies more generally. Now, it's, I think, worthwhile to pursue these ideas, but it's important that we don't reinvent the wheel. So while these data and methods and devices may be relatively new, there's a pretty theoretically solid foundation that was developed in the later part of the 20th century with a variety of time geographers, people like Hagerstrand and Lentorp and Elkard, who kind of pioneered a lot of this work. And so, as Lentorp put it in a paper from 2004, time geography aims to demonstrate the dynamism and changeability of everything with a focus on the material. And they differentiate time geography from sort of more conventional time use research by noting that time geography is really more focused on is more focused on the flows across space and context, and not means and aggregates. So in the more interdisciplinary field of time use research, we see a lot of work that aggregates certain types of activities together. So for example, in this figure, we see time for meals is compressed into sort of one lump on the left, and then relating that to some outcome using statistical models. But the focus on the sort of structure and sequence and flows and the context where those things occur is really the sort of bread and butter of time geography. Now, there are four concepts that I think are worth quickly reviewing in time geography. that will be sort of used in the research I'll be presenting. The first two are relatively common, that you've probably seen papers that utilize these methods over the last couple decades, if not for a longer period of time. Trajectories are continuous, indivisible, and positively directed along the temporal dimension. These are essentially records or accounts of a person's whereabouts or some things whereabouts. So it's where they go, when they go there. You can think of them as a GPS trajectory, which we'll go later. And prisms, which are a bit more complicated, think a bit more about the potential spaces one can interact with thanks to, or given particular constraints and fixed points in time. So I've got just a couple examples of how these are used in food environment research. So the trajectory work is just kind of an extension of the work that looks at where people live and associating where those folks live with the food retail environment around them. And then oftentimes they'll relate those levels of access and exposure to different types of outcomes. So here we've got from a paper we did a few years back, in the upper right-hand corner, a two-dimensional image of a GPS trajectory, and then a time-weighted kernel density surface beneath it. And so we can see where this person spends more time. And then the three-dimensional image is essentially just sort of emphasizing that, in this case, the home location was here on the right, work was over here on the left, and then there's some other common activity location here in the center. So we can think about this person's exposure either along their pathway or at these activity locations that are along their space. So there are plenty of limitations to trajectory analysis in food environment research. Issues like selective mobility bias, where essentially if a person wants to go eat fast food, then they will go eat fast food, and then we will see exposure to a fast food restaurant. So it gets a little complicated in how we interpret the trajectory in food environment research. In addition, it can be kind of costly to deploy a data collection at scale. There's some reliability issues, though those are becoming a bit less important. But I think most importantly, these data are devoid of context in a lot of cases without sort of additional data collection. So we don't know why a person went to any particular location unless we ask them or have them collect information in some other way. Prisms, on the other hand, they sort of show that potential, and there's all these constraints that they talk about. I'll kind of skip over that for now. I think most folks are probably familiar with space-time prisms, but essentially you may have two locations, like your home and work location, and given some time budget, say you have an hour to get home from work, you may have the potential to reach different types of spaces. So this gives us a sense of what might happen in a person's food environment given their fixed locations in space. And these are things that we've applied, I guess 7 or 6 years ago now in Cincinnati, where we looked at automobile and transit networks as constraints and looked at how access to food retailers varied based off of these different types of transportation modes. Finding that essentially folks who rely on transit are going to have a much more complicated journey, which is maybe not surprising in a lot of North American cities. But what we did see is that access around work locations actually improved many different transit riders' accessibility to food retailers in this paper. Now, there are two other concepts in time geography that are less popular, less well known, that I think kind of drive a lot of the work that we're trying to do with this new study. And these are pockets of local order and projects. And so pockets of local order are basically, they're saying that most activities require some defined sections of space-time and have often specific relevant infrastructure and agents with certain aims and goals. And this theory, or this part of time geography, kind of corresponds to other theories that are out there, like actor network theories, assemblage theory, where essentially, there needs to be sort of this meeting of different actors and infrastructures in space and time to allow for a thing to occur. The idea is a little abstract, and so we're not going to go too into that particular concept, but the idea of projects, on the other hand, is something that can be quite useful. And so projects are essentially activities that require sequenced processes in pockets of local order to execute for some particular goal. So as an example, on the right, I've got a project of eating a healthy meal, which might involve these 8 activities of traveling to a food store, buying the ingredients, traveling home, preparing the food, cooking the food, serving the food, eating the food if it's a healthy meal, and cleaning up. And so these things all have their own geographies, they all have their own time requirements. And that eating of healthy food can't really occur without the inclusion of these other things. And you can expand that to something a bit more broad, like the project of being healthy. So eating a healthy meal could be a project within this bigger project of being healthy. And now this concept of projects is related somewhat to what's been done in the time use literature. And just as an example here, there's quite a bit of work out there where folks have essentially shown that the amount of time people spend on things like meal preparation has impacts on both food-related behaviors like time spent eating, as well as sort of bigger questions around health. Some work we did recently with a national time use diary sample in Canada here shows strong statistically significant relationships between the time people spend on meal preparation and their self-rated levels of stress, mental health, and time pressure. But we start to see that in the time use literature, we're able to then also sort of decompose the activities and look at those sequences to understand what the projects might look like around some activity like meal preparation. And so this image on the right has meal preparation in the center. This 0 is the meal preparation variable. And we see all the different types of variables the participants in the survey, or excuse me, the activities the participants in the surveys were participating in before and after the 2 previous and 2 post activities to meal preparation. And we see that there are significant differences between people who have high levels of self-rated health and lower levels of self-rated health, along with mental health, stress, the amount of time available, feeling rushed, things like that. So the sequence is related to these sort of downstream outcomes, which is actually quite important. But these surveys don't have that spatial component, which I think a lot of us would be interested in. So why did a particular activity occur in a particular space, and did that affect other activities that occurred later on in the sequence? And so the idea behind the food activities socioeconomics time and transportation study was to integrate that time use diary into these the data collection methods that have been deployed by a lot of researchers recently using GPS trajectory information, for example, to try to bring context to that sort of dynamic exposure access component of food environment research. And so here we're really trying to ask questions like, how does your time use affect your dietary behaviors? And how do your dietary behaviors then subsequently affect your time use? So if you're spending more time cooking fresh meals from scratch, then that's going to give you less time to do other things later on. Then how does your geography affect your time use, and how does your time use affect your geography? So there's really important questions about how our cities are built, issues around the suburbanization of poverty, for example. So if people are spending more time commuting and they live further away, then that's going to affect their time use. And finally, how does then geography affect dietary behaviors, and how do the dietary behaviors affect geography? So if you're near a food retailer that sells affordable and healthy foods, then perhaps you're more likely to go to that store to shop. So we're trying to sort of connect all of these dots together, which is a pretty challenging task. And we did data collection in 2019, and we're kind of in the midst of analyzing the data at the moment. So you've caught me at a time where we're not quite done with the analysis, but we have some interesting preliminary results. So it's a great opportunity to talk with you all to potentially get some feedback. So the data we collected was in Toronto. We aimed to collect data from 3 neighborhoods, 2 of which we had community partners with already. And the 2 where we got reasonable numbers of respondents were where we had community partners, which is of course a lesson for folks. In Rexdale, we were partnered with the Rexdale Community Hub, where we do a lot of work. I work a lot with the members there doing educational programs and things like that. And in South Parkdale, which is a neighborhood just west of downtown Toronto. And the idea was that these neighborhoods all had sort of unique built environments. In Rexdale, there's not very much transit. It's more car oriented, it's lower density. There aren't as many food retailer opportunities. And in South Parkdale, we have good access to transit. Toronto has a pretty good transit system generally, and there are quite a few opportunities to access affordable food retailers in this neighborhood. And then out east, we had a neighborhood where we tried to intercept recruiting, and we got 4 people to respond, which is not great. And so we've essentially tossed those observations. Unfortunately, we just didn't get enough response there. But the eastern neighborhood was an area where we actually had less access to transit, but there was pretty good access to food retail in that area. So in the survey, we recruited adults. And the adults were, we tried to get all of the adults within a household so we'd be able to understand how partners either complemented or not each other in their time use and in their activities related to food. So maybe one person's responsible for food shopping and the other cooks, for example. And we had 3 main data collection tools. We had a survey, just a standard questionnaire asking questions about socioeconomic status, diet, health, transportation opportunities, as well as some information so free-form questions around their perceptions of their food environment and what they thought of their access to food retailers in their neighborhoods. Then we had 7 days of GPS data and a dietary questionnaire that corresponded to that. So we were able to collect information about what types of meals they ate each day. And so that was 7 days of data. And then corresponding with that, we had a time use diary. So it was a twice a day recall time use diary based off of the Harmonized European Time Use Survey, which is a standardized form of time use diary data collection. Now the time use diary looked a little bit like this. So it was a 10-minute interval. Essentially, a person would write their primary activity in the first column whenever that activity started, and then draw an arrow down to whenever that activity ended. If there was a secondary activity, so for example, here, this is one of my grad students filled this out in a pilot, which they've let me share. They're eating lunch outside at about 12:40 p.m. and the secondary activity is socializing. So we're able to get some level of complexity in what activities are occurring. There's a description of location or transport mode if they're traveling, and then some information about who's with them while they're doing that activity. And so these are rather burdensome data collection tools. So we compensated the participants, or incentivized, I should say, the participants with cash initially for a first component of the study. We didn't want to provide grocery store gift cards while they were doing the study, so it didn't influence their food shopping behavior. And then after they returned the diaries, we gave them $60 gift cards to a local grocery store. Now, the GPS data looked like this. You can see most of our data is in the northwest of Toronto and near downtown, so in our 2 study neighborhoods. And so with all this information, then we're able to start to address some of those questions that I was asking earlier in the talk about how does one's time use influence their geography, and how does their geography then subsequently influence their time use. But we can also get at questions around the division of household labor, because we collected multiple adults in the household, and we also have variables around time stress and link those to things like dietary behaviors. So we can start with maybe one example here, and then I'll show something that's a little bit more in the works. So this first example of one of the projects we're doing with this data set is looking at how household geographies and division of labor affect access and exposure to food environments. And then we're ultimately going to link that into different types of shopping behavior. Though right now I'll just focus on the household geographies and how they impact food environments. And so the study design allowed for us to compare partners' activities and also their geographies. So as an example here, I have two participants, and the top participant is, in this case, it's a female, and the bottom participant, it's a person who identified as male. And we have different types of activities that occur. These are in 10-minute intervals. And we can see the different types of activities and how they sort of play out over the course of 7 days. This dark gray is sleep. And we can see the woman in this case is doing spending much more time on chores and childcare. The man in this example is a regular worker. He works 6 days a week. And so we can start to see how these two things align and whether or not there's sort of complementary behavior, or if there's sort of barriers in ways that people are trying to seek out access to food retail, et cetera. So when we then map that into our trajectory data, we're able to start to incorporate that local context. Now, one of the questions we wanted to first answer with our data set is a relatively simple one, but I think something worth exploring. And that is, what are the implications of using trajectory data of only one household member to calculate exposure scores if the task can be completed by multiple household members? So here we're thinking about the fact that in many cases we see multiple household members participating in food shopping activities. And a lot of previous research will either just pick a participant because they're a convenient participant, or they'll ask, are you the primary food shopper of your household, and pick them to examine their food accessibility. And we wanted to ask what's missing if we don't capture all the adult members of the household, and also relate that back to who's actually doing the shopping. And so we essentially looked at our respondents who could fall within any of these categories, A, B, or C. We have one adult who has some activity space. So we have a path area here with the small dots, and maybe these sort of activity space locations with the larger dots. We could have a situation where we had one adult respond, but the other adult in the household didn't respond. So we have the respondents' information about where they go, but not their partners or their housemates. Or we could have this situation where we have all the adults or most of the adults in the household, and we can get a sense of where each of them goes, what their exposure and access looks like over the course of the week that we collected data. And so before I get into what we found, I'll just make a few notes on the sample. I'm not going to go over this table. This is torture to look at that, so I'll just summarize. I want to just note off the bat that the data are not representative because we just simply didn't have the numbers for these areas. I think that that's a big limitation that we'll have to deal with as we move forward in our analysis. But the focus was on households with multiple adults. By chance, our sample only contains heterosexual couples, so there are male and female partners. We didn't receive any same-sex couples or other gendered couples in our sample. We did see higher completion rates in Rexdale. The participants in Parkdale are slightly higher income, but the design was meant to sort of look at two neighborhoods that have, at the census level, similar median incomes. So these two neighborhoods are similar at that level, but our participants are a little bit different. And then by chance, again, a majority of our participants identify as South Asian. This is expected in Rexdale because there's a large South Asian population, but not necessarily in Parkdale. It's a relatively diverse neighborhood, but I think it's something like 20% of the population in Parkdale is South Asian. So we'll just have to chalk that up to the small n. So when we do look at the data, though, what we do see are a few things. The first, we see if we look at how an individual's activity space size differs between their household and their partners, we see that men consistently have larger activity spaces across 3 different types of measures. So we used path area, which essentially traces along the trajectory. There's a buffer along the trajectory. Activity locations, so these are areas where the person spent 10 minutes or more. And then weighted activity locations, and these are those 10-minute or more locations, and then weighted by the amount of time they actually spent there. So what we see is that in the path area and activity locations measures is that the amount of space that women go to in our sample is less consistently than the men that are in the same household. So the men are going they are traveling in larger areas than the women in their household are traveling. The weighted locations are about the same, and that's maybe expected because of the way that the weighted calculations were done. Next, we see that when we actually look at access to different types of food retailers, when we look at counts, there's not much different with the path area or activity locations measures, but when we account for the amount of time spent at different activity locations, we do see that women have a increased number of stores, supermarkets available to them in their weighted activity locations. And then when we look at densities, so the stores per area across these 3 measures, we do see women have consistently more density for these different types of food retailers across the 3 different measures. So for supermarkets, greengrocers, and convenience stores. And so there's a few takeaways from this right away. The first is that leaving out an individual in a household with multiple shoppers can result in missing a significant number of exposures. And this is important because when we ask the question, are you the primary shopper or do you share shopping responsibility, to all of our participants? And we found that a lot of people who actually identified doing shopping trips in the time use diary would say that they are the primary shopper. But if they had a partner who didn't do any shopping trips, they would usually say something like they were either they shared responsibility, or they were also a primary food shopper for their household. So it can be a little tricky to know if a person really is the primary one responsible for accessing food in that person's household. So if we don't account for all the actors who may be doing this activity, it could result in some issues with your results. Other takeaways: men appear to make up most of the household activity space areas, but women's activity spaces were typically have greater food retail densities, and this was especially the case for supermarkets. And then finally, comparing men and women in the same household, the density of supermarkets are greater for women across all measures in our findings here. So I think this is sort of, it's again a small sample, but I think that it sort of points to the larger issue that by leaving out members of the household, we're going to have potentially issues in this sort of access exposure model. So the second area that we're exploring right now, which again is underway, so we're still working on these results. I apologize, they're not completely formed at this point, but we're essentially asking, how does the time use of a person affect food-related behaviors, and how do the built environments then impact their time use? And we're trying to think of ways that we could do this. Is there a way to link the time use diaries, so the activities that they report doing, with the trajectory data to identify common patterns across these 2 different sequence dimensions? And we came across the method of multi-channel optimal matching which is used oftentimes in sequence analysis of like DNA. And we applied this to the activity categories and the locations that we can derive from our GPS trajectory information. So we used the Needleman-Wunsch algorithm, which compares 2 sequences together, and then use the Ward method to cluster those sequences together. So we're able to look at multiple sequences of a person in tandem and then compare them against other people's sequences. And in this case, we created 5 clusters. So we decide how many clusters there are, and the sort of optimal difference between our clusters was resulted in 5 different categories. So maybe I won't go over this for time's sake, but essentially you can compare 2 sequences by measuring the substitution costs as you sort of go through the sequence. We standardized all of our GPS location sequences to 10-minute intervals so that they matched the activity diary sequence, which was at 10-minute interval. So here are some examples of our data. So here we have all the different activity sequences of our participants in the GPS data. And so we want to smush this stuff together. And when we do that and cluster, we end up with these 5 groups. And so in the activity dimension, we've simplified the activity categories to these 6 standardized categories of work or study, household chores, child or adult care, I should say, other activities, food chores, and food shopping. And then on the location sequence side, we took the GPS trajectories and defined them as either being at home, in their residential neighborhood, which I believe was within a kilometer of their home, or beyond their residential neighborhood. And then we differentiated whether or not that neighborhood, beyond the residential neighborhood and in the residential neighborhood, was nearby a food retailer that was, in our case, we were looking at supermarkets at the moment, or if the data were missing. And so we end up with these sort of 5 unique clusters here. So we have sort of more evening time workers in the first category, with this sort of dark beyond neighborhood level for the location sequence. We have quite a few sequences where there's no work in the day, and then most of their location sequence shows them being at home or near home. We have sort of regular sort of daytime working for both pattern 3 and 4, but these were differentiated by the fact that pattern 3 was beyond the neighborhood without access to food retailers, and pattern 4 was beyond the neighborhood with access to food retailers. So this is sort of capturing there's an opportunity for food retail access at the work location. And then we have a shift worker category, which is this nighttime working, which didn't have very many observations. So we'll leave that be for now. So with this information, what we're planning on doing is essentially looking then at how often people are doing things like cooking, and how those relate to being a member within these different categories, and other outcomes like whether or not they're cooking meals every day. So we have the daily types of meals information that we collected, so we can see if meals were from scratch or from a restaurant or prepared by somebody else. And we can start to relate these things to these clusters of activity and location sequences. We can also look at how a person who belongs to one cluster, how their activity sequence may result or be affected by their partner's activity sequence. So perhaps a person then who is at home most of the day will commonly see that they have a partner who's at work most of the day, or maybe we see 2 people at work most of the day, and then we see different types of dietary outcomes or different amounts of time spent on things like food chores. I threw this together very quickly. It's just looking at duration of food chores over the 7 days, and whether or not your partner belongs to one of these 5 categories. And we see type 5 and type 3 clusters, which was the shift working, and I believe this was the no access to food retailer day workers categories. People who are partners of those categories, people who belong to those categories, excuse me, are spending more time at the 50th percentile on chores. Though again, we're dealing with small n, so I don't want to speak too much to these results. So where do we go with this? I think it's too early for a takeaway for this part of the analysis. I think we do need to reintroduce the complexity of space into the equation here. So right now we've categorized things in a kind of naive way. And I think one of the things we're going to do is ask, what are the food, retail, transportation, and childcare environments for those various spatial categories, and maybe create more discrete, or I should say disaggregated types of location categories to describe where activities occur. So in the case where many of these participants are parents, whether or not they have access to childcare either along their route to work or near work could make a big difference in how they spend their time and what that means for other activities like food related behaviors. We do have data on those food shopping events, like I mentioned. So when and where do those actually happen? We're mapping that at the moment. And how do these result in different downstream activities? So we can look at when a shopping event occurs and maybe how patterns diverge from each other as we look at time progressing. And then how does cluster membership of participants from the same household compare? And do we see complementary or unequal labor distribution? And in what cases do we see that? Again, I'm not super hopeful about that last point just because I think our N is too small to say anything statistically about our data, but I do think we could potentially find some very interesting examples that may sort of feed into future work that we'll do in this area. So where to next after all of that? I think generally there's an opportunity to use theories and methods from time geography more than we have been, and beyond just looking at trajectories and prisms. So this idea of the project in particular, I think, could be a real benefit to quantitative health geographers because it does sort of account for activities occurring in sequence and how those sequences are linked to different types of outcomes. I think, for example, we're doing work on food, but I think in physical activity research, research on mental health, which we're doing a bit of work on now with older adults, and work on care and caring, so child care, older adult care, how time, use, and place together work towards different outcomes, and maybe how we can design interventions that help people achieve better outcomes, healthier lives, a better well-being. More well-being, I should say. I think this is also a prime example of where mixed methods can be applied to get at nuanced understandings of health. And I just want to emphasize that I think that working with community members is really key to making this happen. And so in our case, we're really involved with the community in Rexdale. And they're a part of designing the next steps in this research program, and also thinking about how these results can be used to sort of advocate for their community. So we're working with them to sort of show, in their case in particular, they're very interested in access to transit. So with our data, we can sort of show or not the role that lack of access to transit plays in maybe some of their mobility challenges, if they exist. So with that, I'm happy to end. I think I've done it with 10 minutes left here. I'm happy to end and answer any questions. Again, I'd like to thank Lindsay and Bochu for their help and work and our funders. But I have my email and Twitter handle if you care to reach out. I'm always happy to chat. And I guess at that point, I'll stop sharing the screen. And I'm happy to chat. If you have feedback, questions, comments, critiques, I can take it.
So thank you so much, Michael. It's very interesting, exciting work. I never know that there's a linkage between meal preparation time with mental health. I feel I need to pay more attention to my mental health, maybe. I think we have some questions for audience. You can type in your questions, or if you want to speak, we can unmute you, then you can speak. I think I got the question from Louisa. Louisa's question, I think, have 3 parts. So first, what was the time interval for GPS data collection? Second, what did the recruitment process look like? And why do you think you had such low enrollment in the 3rd area in the Northeast? I think that's good in the beginning. Maybe.
Yeah, so the intervals for GPS data, it was, so we used a cell phone app. So one of our team members developed a custom app, and So it was often. I can't give you an exact number because each cell phone collects GPS data a little bit differently, but it was on the order of seconds while they were moving. And if the phone detected that they were stationary for, I think it was 20 minutes, it would collect data, I think, every 10 minutes. So, and then when it detected that there'd been a move, so there was a geofence that was set up, and then on that geofence that would start collecting a question about recruitment. So in Rexdale and Parkdale, we worked with, so I have an established relationship with the folks in Rexdale. And in Parkdale, we were building a new relationship, which we're still working with them on this. And so we were able to talk with sort of leaders in the community who connected us with different participants who then spread the word. And we set up at community centers, we had tables, information tables for people to ask questions and things like that. So it was a very involved process, which is partially why we have such a low N. It took a lot of time to do all that work. And in the neighborhood we didn't get good response rates at, we just did on the street intercept recruiting. And it was just, I think it was just not a good place to do that because it is a bit more suburban. People aren't, it's not like downtown Toronto where everyone's walking everywhere. It was just not a good place to do it. So I think it's a lesson learned for me. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, I think we also have a question from Brian. Do you want to speak, Brian? I can unmute you.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Michael, it's good to see you again. I wish we were in New Zealand right now.
Yeah.
Last time I saw you. So thank you so much for being here virtually. I've got two questions. There's other questions in the Q&A, so I'll be quick. The first one is, I'm thinking in terms of your presentation was great. Thank you so much. And early in it, you were using the term kind of healthy food. And this made me think a little bit of an article I read years ago by Becky Mansfield about fish, and about fit. In the title of the article, she asks, "Is fish healthy or is it poison?" And she was getting at these narratives about what constitutes kind of healthy food. And I'm wondering, in what ways are you considering or wrestling with that yourself in terms of not just assessing what people are eating and the time spent kind of collecting that food and producing it, but also how we might kind of assign a particular value to it. And the second question is, and I'm reticent because I don't want to be a victim of what I think we're going to see over the next 3 years or so of geographic research, which is the codivization of everything. But I'm really interested if you've given some thought to thinking about, as this research moves forward, the ways that the COVID-19 pandemic is disrupting traditional kind of travel patterns and these other forms of food production, food consumption, and what that might mean for intra-household dynamics or gender patterns. And so kind of two questions there, but I'm just interested in your thoughts given, kind of the value, the great work you're doing and the amount of time that you're putting into these questions.
Yeah, thanks. It's good to virtually see you as well. I think, so for the first question, I think that's a great question, and I'll be frank, we're not grappling with it in any really nuanced way. Part of that is because we're really focused. A lot of the work that we're going to do is focused on the shopping and food related behavior, and we're going to kind of sidestep the issue of then what that food is. So we'll be able to see who's doing the food retail, like who's visiting the food retailer, who's spending the time cooking. And I think that for a lot of the papers that we'll write, we may just really need to stop there because there is the bad habit of just saying, supermarket equal healthy, but you know what? I buy Oreos at the supermarket all the time. So that's a really complicated question. And I think that I think there's value in looking at who's doing the food activities. And I think that there are links then to, if you spend a lot of time on meal prep, that probably means that you're using more, from scratch food, which is generally going to be healthier. And so these are very hand wavy kind of things, but I think we're kind of sidestepping that question for now. related to the COVID question, we had a project looking at how the sort of gradual adoption of food or grocery delivery services is going to affect food retailers, brick and mortar food retailers. We were doing in January 2020. And I scrapped it in March because everything's up in the air right now. It's crazy here. Food and grocery delivery services are just all over the place. And, there's still an issue with, so there's a big issue with, so it's a wealthier person's privilege to use a grocery delivery service because it's still expensive. So I think that's not going to be a big issue for the population we're looking at here. But I think you're right to say that the mobility patterns of people are going to change when we're out of lockdown. We're still in lockdown here in Toronto, and I don't know what that's going to look like. I think we're just going to have to wait and see. So let's talk in 3 years. Those are not very satisfying answers to your questions, but I think they're important questions to ask.
Okay, I think we have at least three more questions. I saw Stephen, Matthew, and also Carl raised a hand. How about we ask Stephen to ask first? Okay, I can. Hi, Stephen. We cannot hear you. Hello?
Oh, I don't hear him either. He is unmuted. This is really a shame because I really like Stephen's work and I don't think I've ever met him. And so he'll just
can you hear me?
I can, yes, great.
Thank you, Michael. I've really enjoyed, actually, I've enjoyed your work as well, so it's mutual. And I've also enjoyed learning about this project. I wanted to actually congratulate you on including dyads. I've long been pushing for studies to include dyads on people in households, not necessarily always in food environment research. So part of it was, I was going to mention that. You alluded to not kind of reinventing the wheel, and this may be a bit unfair, and I'm sure you know about this work, but there's a lot of work in behavioral geography and a lot of work in early feminist geography, looking at time geography that explored differences between men and women. And so I think there's things there that you might look at if you haven't already. And of course, not surprisingly, Brian stole my question about COVID. In part, though, because we're also, I work with Shannon Zenk and others, and we have a study in the field in Chicago about to start doing all of this. And originally, we thought about how do we redesign our current questions, and then it becomes a very different. The problem becomes too vast. I would just add that it's not just going to be about differences in mobility. I suspect there's also going to be differences in temporal patterns of how we shop. And other types of things. I mean, I think people are finding that they can juggle their time if we can. We're doing things differently now than we were, and sometimes we're doing things differently in ways that we perhaps prefer. And I wonder about. It's a pity that we didn't collect data before the COVID, because it would have been great to have done a before and after study as well. But the point I wanted to make, actually, I guess, was about the men and women and their activity spaces. I think you'll find lots of literature. Even early literature. John Everett did a paper in 1976. I just looked it up, published in the Annals, that compares men and women in Los Angeles, husbands and wives, and their kind of activity spaces and friendship networks. So geographers have been doing this stuff. It's just not. It's been forgotten about, I think.
No, you're right, and I think we're definitely aware of some of that work. I don't know if that paper in particular is one in our library, but definitely we've come across work from in the 70s, and a bit more recently too. Like I know Meipo Kwan has done some work in this area. I think it was in the 90s.
Right.
I think and I think there's value in updating it because there has been 50 years since that work has been done to see if there are changes in those patterns. So again, the N is a limit to us. But I mean, you're right. I think we need to make sure that we acknowledge that work was there because it's good work and we shouldn't forget it. So,
right. So another quick question, because you're using smartphones, are you using EMA methods, or I'm surprised you did the kind of time use diaries, pen and paper. In the sense, I wasn't surprised, but you could gather the data through the cell phone as well.
Well, we did think of this data survey that was sort of ready to go. EMA, so it's ecological momentary assessment, for those who aren't familiar. My understanding too is that with that, you're sort of pinging at random times, say like, hey, what's going on now? And you get sort of a sample of what's happened over the course of that person's day. Is that right? Or is
that's how it's often used, yes.
Yeah, and I think we considered that, but we decided that we wanted sort of a full accounting of the day, and doing it on the phone became a little bit complicated because also the population, so these two neighborhoods are sort of lower middle income neighborhoods. So we saw a wide variety of phones, many of which were smartphones, but were a few generations old with very small screens. So it became just a little too complicated. We decided the paper was actually pretty good. People liked it. We gave them a booklet and they filled it out, mailed it back. But I do think in some populations, like a younger adult population, it would be probably ideal, and you'd probably get good data too if you develop some sort of app.
So the project I'm involved in is a midlife study, and so one of the questions I actually had for you, but partly because I think you've got such a small N, you're not looking at how things are broken down by age or kind of life cycle stages, where the ability to be involved in things like shopping activities might vary based on both time, but also your physical health.
Yeah. Well, we did our recruitment. I didn't mention this, but we were focused mostly on parents and people who were adults. So 25 to 60, I think, was our limiting factor. But any adults in the household were eligible. So we have a number of cases where there were grandparents that lived with the family as well, which was an interesting addition to the study, though we don't have very many of them. So that kind of controls for that a little bit, but I think taking a life course perspective would be really fascinating in a study like this too.
Well, thank you very much and good luck.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Carl, you have a question?
Yeah. Hey, Michael, what a great talk. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. So rich in this data at the household and individual level and the behavioral level. So my question is a little bit at a different level, although it's kind of the one where you started off, which is the built infrastructure level. And I'm wondering, given all the insights that you have, are there any general points that you can make, even I suppose if they're somewhat provisional, about the relation of the built environment in which you have all this rich data in relation to health related factors of food? And I'm thinking of greengrocer kinds of occurrences, for example. So, you have these three neighborhoods, they're different built environments. Are there relations between kind of urbanization or urban space and greengrocer like occurrences? I guess it's in your data, but they're not necessarily the data points that you're focused on. But as I was listening to your talk, it definitely seems within the overall space of what you do and you're interested in. So I'm just wondering if you would have any comments about that level of your data, or even just your observations, right? I totally understand it might not be your focus.
Yeah. Well, can you define, what do you mean by greengrocer? Are you referring to?
It was just in your data set. So you had supermarkets, greengrocer, and convenience stores. And in terms of healthy food outcomes, in a very simplistic way, greengrocers are often, as you know, substituted as a outcome variable for healthy food.
So that could be definitional, a definitional issue. So in Toronto we have lots of sort of bodega style stores. So they're just small grocers, like small grocery stores that have a wide variety, but maybe small volume. And we see a lot of those in the Parkdale neighborhood. There's a lot of these independent shops that are not like, I don't know what you guys have with their Wegmans or Kroger's or whatever. So we've got those all throughout the city. And then in Parkdale in particular, we have a lot of these sort of bodegas, which sell all the different types of produce that you may want from a healthy food store, and other groceries, meats and fish and things like that. But they're just more common downtown because it's denser. And so you're going to see more of those types of opportunities in the more dense urbanized part of the city. But I should say that Rexdale, even though it is more suburban, it's still pretty dense. So I'm American, by American city standards. I grew up in Memphis. Like Rexdale puts like downtown Memphis to shame. It's just relative to the Parkdale neighborhood, which is very dense. I'm not sure I'm answering your question.
So no, I think you're doing a great job. The connection would be then if density is explaining greengrocer occurrence, and we oversimplify that to sort of healthy food access, therefore, but in a denser environment, do something like travel times or the time part. Does the time part of access vary like favorably or unfavorably? And it seems like there's a really interesting way of kind of embedding the time data in the built environment. And so I'm just trying to like connect the question to make that connection.
Yeah, no, okay, I understand. Yeah, so that is something we're going to be looking at, and that will come out when we look at. So the idea is basically if you're commuting an hour or 2 hours every day, then you have less time to do other things later on, and then you're back in your neighborhood and your nearest grocery store is a 20-minute drive. That's going to then make the issue more complicated for you to pick up something that may be more complex to make later on. You'll spend less time doing meal prep. Maybe you get a frozen pizza or something instead, versus somebody who works downtown, lives downtown, has very easy access to these different stores because they're in a dense environment. So that was part of the reason we picked these two neighborhoods in particular. So that travel component is of a lot of interest to us. I mean, I think this whole study started in conversations especially with folks in Rexdale about there were single parents, and some of the work we were doing there talking about, we work 2 jobs and they have kids. They don't have time to eat healthfully because it doesn't matter if they're next door to the supermarket, because if they're commuting to these 2 jobs and taking care of their kid, they need to feed everyone, and they need to do it in a way that's efficient and makes sense. So it's a completely rational choice, and it's not a judgment on my part. It's just the way that our cities are built do have this effect on us. And we also have to account for the fact that there are these external factors that are influencing how we use that space. So if that person is on top of the grocery store, it may not matter. So those are some of the things we're going to try to tease out as we continue the analysis.
Just anecdotally, and you probably know this already, but one of the people that I'm working with has been working on sort of block length and the role of greengrocer access in pedestrian kinds of communities, which can be conditioned even by like the spatial structure of city blocks. So it seemed to me that was just a really additional example of the kind of stuff that you're working on and talking about.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. So it's an interesting area.
No, thanks to you.
For sure. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of very good discussion, and we have 2 questions actually from Lily, and I think she posted 20 minutes ago. So she's asking, in terms of sampling, I was wondering why not use a stratified sampling method, and also to determine the linkages to mental health. There are so many contributing factors and confounding variables. How to control for this?
Yeah. So for the stratified sampling method, that was actually what we wanted to do. So we picked these neighborhoods very purposefully, controlling their median income levels. Sorry, the cats come. Controlling the demographics, controlling all sorts of things, and we sort of looked for that variation in transportation opportunities and food environments, and we had ends in the proposal that were large enough to allow us to get power in those neighborhoods. But then, the proposal was funded, and we went out and collected the data, and everything went wrong, and we ended up with what we ended up with. So the stratification was the goal, but I failed at doing it, quite frankly. So yeah, I've definitely learned a lot. I will say this was my first big project, but with something that was collecting so many different types of information that's quite sensitive to a lot of people, and building up the community relationships, it just wasn't feasible. Related to mental health, yeah, that's another great question. So we don't touch on mental health too much in the food activities, socioeconomics, and time use and travel survey, but in the other paper we're doing, yeah, there are a lot of contributing factors and confounding variables. And the sort of quick analysis I showed looking at mental health, that's a part of a sort of bigger paper where we're just looking at sort of the general associations, and we have a very long discussion about the confounding factors that we would need to account for in that, because the causal relationship's also unclear. So if somebody has poor mental health, maybe they spend less time on food-related activities, but it may be the other way. Maybe if they're spending less time on food-related activities, it could be contributing to poor mental health. I don't know what the pathway, which direction the pathway is pointed. So that's definitely something I don't want to overstate our findings with mental health there. I think that is worthy of a lot more attention.
Okay, thank you so much. I think if you still have questions, I think you can contact Michael directly. I think we kind of run out a lot of time. So yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Michael, for accepting our invitation.